I think you've whet their appetite. So how would you describe what patent prosecution is? We're going to discuss it during our synchronous class meeting later this week, and we'll also discuss it when we get into the elements of patentability. But what exactly, as a practice matter, is patent prosecution?
Yeah, patent prosecution is basically the administrative process. It really has nothing to do with prosecution in a criminal law sense. So this is really you're prosecuting an application before the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. So there's two steps typically before you get to the USPTO. You usually have your client or some inventors who you're working with will come to you with an invention. And then you typically will do a patentability search. So you do a search for prior art, and you'll come to some conclusion of what aspects of this invention are novel and non-obvious, and those are the requirements for patentability. So, new, useful, non-obvious. Once you sort of finish the search, and then you get a more detailed disclosure of the invention. You work with the inventors to do that. And that then becomes your patent application. You go back and forth on drafts, you work on figures, you work on examples, you work on claims, and then that patent application is then submitted to the patent office, and that sort of launches the patent prosecution process. So then once the application is filed in the patent office, you have technical people. They're patent examiners. They're usually examining applications in the particular field of your invention. They may be lawyers, but they do not have to be lawyers. They're typically people with bachelor's, master's, or PhDs, depending on the technology area. They're very well qualified typically, and they have had tremendous experience. So if you were to go and file an application on some genetic sequence for developing some particular biologic, then you're virtually guaranteed to have a PhD who's going to look at this, and he's looking at these kinds of biologics in a certain specific sub area, like, for example, immuno-oncology. And he may have been looking at that, and that's all he's doing. That's his job. And then
there might be a team of examiners, right?
Right. It could be a team of examiners, but usually there is a primary examiner, or there's one level even below, a junior examiner, and then there's a supervisory examiner. It's called, often referred to as a SPE, a supervising primary examiner. In patent parlance, they call them SPEs. So yes, their work gets checked by more experienced examiners, and then and of course if you were to say you want to file an application for a new kind of circuit or a new kind of modulation scheme in a wireless communication circuit, then you would have these people who are schooled in wireless communication systems and who understand coding and modulation and all those things very well. So then it goes to them, and then they will do their own search. Now, you are required in our patent prosecution rules to have something called a duty of candor. So you have to disclose, material prior art. But assuming you do that, they're not going to be limited by that. They're going to go do their own search, and then they're going to put out something called an office action. And when they put out an office action, they'll tell you, they'll go claim by claim, and they'll tell you this claim is rejected because it doesn't satisfy 35 U.S.C. Section 101, or it's not new because of this reference, and so it doesn't satisfy Section 102, or it doesn't satisfy Section 103 because it's obvious in light of certain combinations of references, or Section 112, so on and so forth. So once you get this office action, then you respond back and you prepare a formal response to the office action where you basically state step by step every rejection, why they're right or wrong, so on and so forth. And usually you have 2 rounds. You pay for an initial search and 2 rounds. That's what your initial filing fee is really for. So you get to go 2 rounds, and then at that point, you make a decision. Hey, should I, file another continuation, like a request for continuing examination, or do I file another application, or do I abandon it, or do I take the claims that have been allowed? And I say, let's take these claims that have been allowed and let that patent go through issuance, and then I will then continue to argue about these other claims. So that's the process by which the patent issues. In addition, there is the ability for you to do interviews with examiners. This is, of course, at the discretion of the examiner, but very often, you might have, after you've gone a round or two, and you think that, hey, let's have a sort of a abbreviated discussion back and forth where I can point to specific things and kind of satisfy the examiner. And so that's interviews. And then, of course, you have appeals. And you have appeals from the patent examining core to the Patent Trial and Appeals Board. So broadly, this process is the process by which an applicant or a patentee gets a patent. And that patent acquisition process is called patent prosecution.
Okay, interesting. And just to